The worst kind of regret is seeing someone happy without you and realizing you were the reason they ever cried. Ryan Brooks did not believe those words until the moment he saw Emma. The black luxury sedan rolled to a smooth stop in front of Knight Global's headquarters in downtown Chicago. Employees hurried past the glass entrance carrying coffee cups and briefcases, barely noticing the expensive car. Ryan noticed. He had been standing across the street for nearly 20 minutes, waiting for a client meeting in the neighboring building. Then the rear passenger door opened, and his entire world seemed to stop moving. Emma stepped out. For a second, Ryan wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him. 1 year ago, she had walked out of his life carrying a single suitcase and a broken heart. The woman standing in front of him now looked completely different. Not because of her clothes. Not because of her hairstyle. It was something deeper. Confidence. Peace. Strength. Emma adjusted the sleeve of her elegant cream-colored blazer and smiled at someone still sitting inside the car. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. A tall man stepped out from the driver's side. Dark navy suit. Expensive watch. Effortless confidence. The kind of confidence that came from power, not arrogance. Alexander Knight. Even Ryan recognized him immediately. Billionaire CEO. Business magazine cover star. One of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. Ryan stared as Alexander said something that made Emma laugh. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind Ryan had not heard in years. Then something happened that hit him harder than he expected. Alexander opened the building door for her. A simple gesture. Nothing dramatic. Yet Ryan suddenly remembered all the mornings he had rushed ahead of Emma without looking back. All the dinners he had cancelled. All the times she had tried to talk while he answered emails instead. Emma thanked Alexander with a warm smile before walking into the building beside him. They disappeared through the revolving doors together. Ryan remained frozen on the sidewalk. Around him, Chicago continued moving. Taxi horns echoed through the streets. Traffic lights changed. Colors. People crossed intersections. But Ryan barely noticed any of it. His mind had already traveled backward. Back to the night Emma asked him a simple question over dinner. "Are you still happy with us?" she had asked. He remembered laughing it off. Remembered telling her she worried too much. Remembered returning to his phone before she finished speaking. At the time, he thought marriage was something permanent. Something that would always be there waiting for him. He never imagined Emma would leave. And he definitely never imagined another man would appreciate everything he had taken for granted. Ryan looked up at the towering Knight Global building. Hundreds of windows reflected the morning sun. Somewhere inside that skyscraper was the woman who used to be his wife. The woman who once waited for him to come home. The woman who had loved him long before he deserved it. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The client meeting. The reason he was there. Ryan ignored it. Because for the first time since signing the divorce papers, a painful thought finally became impossible to avoid. Emma had not been waiting for him. She had moved on. And judging by the look on her face when she stepped out of Alexander Knight's car, she might be happier than she had ever been. As Ryan stood across the street staring at the towering Knight Global headquarters, memories he had spent the last year avoiding began returning one by one. The strange part was that none of them involved dramatic arguments or catastrophic mistakes. The end of his marriage had arrived through something far more ordinary. Neglect. A year and a half earlier, Emma Brooks had still believed her marriage could be saved. Every morning she woke before 6, prepared breakfast, and left encouraging notes on the kitchen counter before heading to work. Ryan usually rushed out the door with coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. At first she understood. He was ambitious. Building a career. Working long hours. She admired that about him. The problem was that eventually his career became the answer to every question. Why did he miss dinner? Work. Why did he forget their anniversary reservation? Work. Why did he spend weekends answering emails instead of spending time together? Work. Emma never demanded expensive gifts or luxury vacations. She wanted attention, conversation, partnership. The things that had once come naturally. One rainy evening she waited nearly 2 hours at a small Italian restaurant they used to love. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. By 8:30, the waiter had refilled her water glass 4 times. Ryan never arrived. At 8:42 he sent a message. Important client meeting. Sorry. Rain check? Emma stared at the screen for several seconds before quietly paying for her untouched dinner and leaving. Ryan never realized that was one of the nights something inside her began breaking. The months that followed were filled with similar disappointments. Small moments that seemed insignificant individually but devastating when combined. Emma would start telling a story and notice Ryan looking at his phone before she finished. She would suggest a weekend trip and hear him explain why work was too busy. She would ask whether they were still happy and receive answers that sounded automatic rather than sincere. The saddest part was that Ryan genuinely believed everything was fine. From his perspective, there were no major problems. No dramatic betrayals. No explosive fights. He thought stability meant happiness. He never noticed Emma becoming quieter. Never noticed her smiling less often. Never noticed how many evenings she sat alone on their apartment balcony wondering whether the man she married still saw her. Then came the conversation he could never forget. It happened on a cool October evening. Emma sat across from him at their dining table. No tears. No anger. Just exhaustion. Ryan, she said softly, when was the last time we actually spent time together? He barely looked up from his laptop. We are together right now. Emma nodded slowly. That is exactly what I mean. Ryan remembered feeling irritated. Not because he disliked her. Because he felt tired after a long day. Why are we having this conversation again? He asked. The hurt that crossed Emma's face lasted only a second. Then she looked away. Never mind. Looking back, Ryan realized that might have been the moment she stopped fighting for the marriage. 3 months later, Emma asked for a divorce. Ryan was shocked. Completely blindsided. He remembered sitting in a lawyer's office convinced she would eventually change her mind. He believed she needed space. Time. Perspective. What he never considered was that Emma had already spent years giving him chances to notice her. By the time the divorce papers were signed, her decision was not emotional. It was final. The memory faded as Ryan looked once more toward the glass towers of Night Global. For the first time he forced himself to confront an uncomfortable truth. Emma had not left because she stopped loving him. She left because she grew tired of loving someone who no longer seemed to notice she was there. The day Emma signed the divorce papers, the sky above Chicago was completely clear. She remembered noticing that because it felt strangely unfair. People often imagined life-changing moments arriving with dramatic storms or emotional speeches. Her marriage ended on a bright spring afternoon with sunlight reflecting off office buildings and traffic moving normally through downtown streets. Ryan sat across from her inside the attorney's conference room looking more confused than heartbroken. That memory stayed with Emma long after everything else faded. Even then, he did not seem to understand what had happened. The paperwork took less than an hour. Signatures. Initials. Formalities. Years of memories reduced to a stack of legal documents. When it was finished, Ryan walked her toward the parking lot. Maybe this is good, he said awkwardly. Maybe we both need some time. Emma remembered looking at him for several seconds. He still believed she would come back. She could see it in his expression. Ryan, she said softly, I did not ask for space. He frowned. Then what are you asking for? The answer sat between them like a truth neither wanted to touch. I asked for us to work on our marriage. Ryan opened his mouth to respond but never found the words. Emma nodded once and walked away. That was the last time she saw him for nearly a year. The first few months afterward were harder than anyone knew. Emma moved into a small apartment on the north side of the city. It was not glamorous. The kitchen was tiny. The elevator broke down twice during her first month. Some evenings the silence felt overwhelming. Yet something unexpected happened. Little by little, she began remembering who she was before she spent years trying to save a relationship by herself. She started reading again. Started taking weekend walks along the lakefront. Started saying yes to opportunities she once avoided. Most importantly, she stopped waiting for someone else to notice her value. 6 months later, a recruiter contacted her regarding a position at Night Global. The opportunity seemed intimidating. The company was larger than any place she had worked before. The interview process was competitive. Emma almost declined. Then she remembered how many chances she had already missed because fear convinced her she was not ready. 2 weeks later she accepted the offer. Her first morning at Night Global felt like the beginning of another life. The headquarters occupied one of the most impressive skyscrapers in Chicago. Glass walls stretched toward the clouds. Employees moved with purpose. Innovation seemed to exist in every corner of the building. Emma arrived 30 minutes early and still found dozens of people already working. Unlike her previous company, the culture felt energetic rather than exhausting. People collaborated. Ideas mattered. Effort was recognized. She quickly discovered that excellence was expected, but respect was expected too. Then she met Alexander Knight. Their first interaction lasted less than 60 seconds. Emma stepped into an elevator carrying a stack of presentation materials. As the doors began closing, someone caught them. A tall man in a navy suit entered and pressed the button for the executive floor. Emma recognized him immediately from business magazines and company announcements. Alexander Knight. Founder. Chief Executive Officer. Billionaire. She expected him to ignore everyone around him. Instead, he noticed the heavy stack of folders slipping in her hands. "Those look important," he said with a small smile. "Or extremely dangerous." Emma laughed despite her nerves. "Mostly dangerous to my schedule." The smile widened slightly. "Good answer." When the elevator reached her floor, the doors opened. "Good luck with the presentation," Alexander said before continuing upward. Emma stepped into the hallway feeling oddly encouraged. It was a brief moment. Almost insignificant. Yet for the first time in a very long time, she walked into work feeling seen rather than overlooked. And without realizing it, she had just stepped into the chapter of her life that would change everything. The first few months at Night Global passed faster than Emma expected. Every week seemed to bring a new challenge, a new project, or a new opportunity to prove herself. Unlike her previous workplace, effort was noticed here. Ideas mattered. Results mattered. Most importantly, people treated one another with respect. Emma found herself looking forward to work for the first time in years. What she did not expect was how often her path would cross with Alexander Knight. It started with small moments. A brief conversation after a meeting. A thoughtful question about a presentation. A simple thank you when a project exceeded expectations. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dramatic. Yet each interaction left an impression. Alexander possessed something Emma rarely encountered in powerful people. He listened. One Tuesday morning, a major marketing campaign ran into serious trouble. A key client was unhappy with the proposed strategy, and several department leaders spent hours debating possible solutions. The atmosphere inside the conference room grew increasingly tense. Executives presented ideas. Consultants offered recommendations. Nothing seemed to work. Emma sat quietly near the end of the table taking notes. She was one of the least senior people in the room. Nobody expected her to speak. Then Alexander looked in her direction. "Emma," he said calmly, "you have been quiet. What do you think?" Several heads turned. Emma felt her pulse quicken. For a moment she considered giving a safe answer. Then she remembered why she had accepted this job in the first place. She explained her concerns about the campaign. Identified several assumptions everyone else had overlooked. Suggested a different approach focused on customer trust rather than aggressive growth targets. The room fell silent. One executive immediately began taking notes. Another nodded slowly. Alexander leaned back in his chair and smiled. "That," he said, "is the first solution today that actually addresses the problem." Within minutes, the entire discussion shifted direction. 2 weeks later, the client approved the revised strategy. The campaign became one of the company's most successful projects of the year. Emma received recognition from leadership. What surprised her most, however, was Alexander's reaction. He never took credit for her work. He never positioned himself as the hero of the story. Instead, he publicly acknowledged her contribution during a company meeting. "Great ideas can come from anywhere," he told the room. "The smartest leaders know when to listen." Emma noticed several coworkers looking at her differently afterward. Not with jealousy. With respect. As months passed, trust slowly developed between them. Alexander often requested her input on important projects. Emma discovered that behind the billionaire reputation was a man carrying responsibilities few people could imagine. Investors demanded results. Employees depended on his decisions. Entire industries watched his every move. Yet despite the pressure, he remained surprisingly grounded. One evening they found themselves leaving the office at nearly the same time. The city lights reflected across the glass walls of the lobby as employees streamed toward elevators and parking garages. "You should probably go home earlier occasionally," Alexander said with a slight smile. Emma laughed. "That sounds like advice you should be giving yourself." Fair point. For a moment they stood watching traffic move through downtown Chicago. Then Alexander asked a question that caught her off guard. "Are you happy here?" Emma considered the answer carefully. A year earlier the question would have hurt. Now it felt different. "Yes," she said honestly. "I think I finally am." Something warm appeared in Alexander's expression. Not excitement. Not surprise. Relief. As though he was genuinely pleased to hear it. Neither of them noticed the significance of that moment. Neither realized how much their lives were already beginning to change. But somewhere between shared conversations, professional respect, and quiet encouragement, a connection had started forming. And for the first time since her divorce, Emma found herself trusting someone again. Ryan tried to forget what he had seen outside Night Global. For 3 days he buried himself in work, convinced the image would eventually fade. It did not. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma smiling beside Alexander Knight. Not because she was impressed by his wealth. Not because she was trying to gain something. The smile looked genuine. That was what bothered him most. One Thursday afternoon, Ryan found himself driving past a bookstore Emma used to love. The sight triggered another memory. Years earlier she had spent an entire Saturday browsing shelves while excitedly telling him about novels she wanted to read. Ryan had spent most of the day checking emails on his phone. At the time, he believed he would always have another weekend with her. Another conversation. Another chance. Now he understood how dangerous that assumption had been. Meanwhile, Emma's life continued moving forward. At Night Global, preparations were underway for one of the company's most important annual presentations. Several major investors would attend. Department leaders worked around the clock refining reports and projections. Emma found herself coordinating between multiple teams. The workload was demanding, but she enjoyed it. For the first time in years, challenge felt energizing rather than exhausting. Late one evening she remained in a conference room reviewing final presentation materials when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find Alexander standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "I suspected I was not the only person still working," he said. Emma laughed. "You are probably responsible for half the lights still being on in this building." "A fair accusation." He handed her one of the cups. "Thought you might need reinforcement." They spent the next hour reviewing strategy notes together. The conversation drifted naturally between business topics and personal observations. Nothing overly intimate. Just 2 people becoming increasingly comfortable around one another. At one point Alexander asked, "Do you ever regret taking this job?" Emma shook her head immediately. Not for a second. Good. The answer came faster than she expected. Why? Alexander looked down at his notes before replying. Because some people improve every room they enter. It would be unfortunate if this company had missed the chance to know one of them. Emma felt unexpectedly speechless. Compliments from executives usually sounded rehearsed. This did not. The sincerity lingered with her long after she returned home that evening. Across the city, Ryan was experiencing a very different night. While organizing old files in a storage closet, he discovered a small cardboard box Emma had forgotten during the divorce. Inside were photographs, greeting cards, ticket stubs, and handwritten notes from the early years of their relationship. Ryan sat on the floor for nearly an hour looking through them. There was a picture from a baseball game where they had laughed through an unexpected rainstorm. A birthday card Emma had written when they were first married. A note thanking him for supporting her during a difficult period in her career. The more he looked, the worse he felt. Not because the memories were painful. Because they reminded him of a version of himself that no longer existed. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped making Emma feel important. The realization followed him into the following week. Then fate intervened. On a bright Monday afternoon, Ryan attended a networking event hosted by a local business association. He was halfway through a conversation when he noticed a familiar voice nearby. His heart immediately recognized it before his eyes did. Emma. Ryan turned and saw her standing across the room speaking with several professionals. She looked confident. Relaxed. Happy. Before he could stop himself, he started walking toward her. Because for the first time since the divorce, he was about to face the woman he had spent the last year trying and failing to forget. Emma heard her name before she saw him. Emma. The familiar voice stopped her in the middle of a conversation. For a moment she thought she imagined it. Then she turned around and found Ryan standing only a few feet away. The crowded networking event seemed to fade into the background. Business leaders continued talking. Servers carried trays through the room. Soft music played near the entrance. Yet all Emma could focus on was the man she had not seen in almost a year. Ryan looked different. Not dramatically. Just older somehow. More tired. Less certain. Hi, Ryan, she said politely. He smiled nervously. Hi. An awkward silence followed. Once upon a time they could talk for hours. Now neither seemed sure where to begin. You look good, Ryan finally said. Emma nodded. Thank you. How have you been? The question almost made her laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible to answer honestly in a few words. I have been doing well, she replied. Ryan studied her expression. I can see that. Something about the way he said it made her uncomfortable. Not because he sounded angry. Because he sounded sad. Before either could continue, one of the event organizers approached Emma. Your presentation was excellent, the woman said enthusiastically. Several people want to speak with you before you leave. Emma thanked her. When the organizer walked away, Ryan looked genuinely surprised. You gave the keynote presentation? Emma nodded. Part of it. That is impressive. She noticed the sincerity in his voice. Years ago she would have waited all day to hear encouragement like that from him. The realization stung more than she expected. Ryan seemed to sense it too. Emma, would it be all right if we talked for a few minutes? She hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave. Yet another part of her felt strangely calm. The hurt that once dominated every interaction was gone. A few minutes, she agreed. They moved toward a quieter section of the venue overlooking the Chicago River. City lights reflected across the water beyond the glass windows. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ryan exhaled. Slowly. I owe you an apology. Emma remained silent. Actually, he corrected himself. I owe you a lot more than that. She watched him carefully. Ryan, please let me finish. His voice remained gentle. I spent the last year convincing myself that the divorce happened because we grew apart. That life got busy. That sometimes things just do not work out. He shook his head. The truth is much simpler. I stopped appreciating the best thing in my life. Emma looked away toward the river. Hearing the words did not bring satisfaction. Only sadness. Ryan continued. I keep remembering all the moments I ignored. All the times you tried to talk to me. All the chances I had to show up for you and did not. He laughed quietly without humor. The worst part is that I honestly thought you would always be there. Emma closed her eyes briefly. That sentence felt painfully familiar. Because it was exactly what she had spent years trying to explain. Ryan, she said softly, we cannot change what happened. I know. He swallowed hard. But if I never told you I was sorry, I would regret it for the rest of my life. The honesty in his voice surprised her. For the first time since the divorce, she believed he truly understood. Not the loss of the marriage. The loss of her. Before Emma could respond, movement near the entrance caught Ryan's attention. His expression shifted instantly. Emma turned and saw Alexander Knight entering the event. Several executives approached him immediately. Yet despite the crowd, Alexander's eyes found hers within seconds. A warm smile appeared on his face. Simple. Genuine. Effortless. Ryan noticed it too. And in that moment, standing between the woman he once loved and the man who clearly valued her now, he felt something he had never experienced before. Not jealousy. Not anger. Regret. Deep, undeniable regret. Because for the first time, Ryan understood that someone else had recognized Emma's worth while he was still learning the lesson he should have learned years ago. After the networking event, Emma told herself nothing had changed. She returned to work the next morning, attended meetings, reviewed reports, and focused on deadlines. Yet, something felt different. The conversation with Ryan lingered in the back of her mind. Not because she wanted to return to the past, but because hearing him finally acknowledge the truth had reopened memories she believed were settled. Meanwhile, Ryan could not stop thinking about what happened that night. For the first time, he had seen the life Emma built without him. More importantly, he had seen the way Alexander looked at her. There was no ownership in that look. No assumption. No expectation. Only respect. The realization bothered him because it highlighted everything he had failed to provide. 3 days later, a large charity fundraiser brought many business leaders together again. Knight Global was one of the primary sponsors, and Emma had spent weeks helping organize the event. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as guests arrived in formal attire. Emma moved through the crowd greeting donors and coordinating schedules. She looked composed, confident, and completely in control. More than once, people stopped her to compliment the evening's success. Across the room, Alexander watched quietly. He found himself smiling every time someone praised her work. Not because the event reflected well on the company, but because he enjoyed seeing Emma receive the recognition she deserved. As the evening continued, he joined her near a display overlooking the city skyline. "You pulled this off beautifully," he said. Emma laughed softly. "A lot of people helped." "That is true," Alexander replied. "But leadership has a way of revealing itself." Before she could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. "Emma." Both turned. Ryan stood only a few feet away holding a small envelope. The atmosphere immediately shifted. Emma remained calm, but Alexander noticed the surprise in her eyes. Ryan looked nervous. More nervous than either of them had ever seen him. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said. "You are," Alexander answered politely. Emma almost smiled at the unexpected honesty. Ryan nodded. "Fair enough." Then he looked directly at Emma. "Could I have 2 minutes?" Alexander glanced at her. The decision was entirely hers. After a moment, Emma agreed. Alexander stepped away without complaint, leaving them beside the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Ryan handed her the envelope. "What is this?" Emma asked. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Several pages. Emma stared at it in surprise. Ryan had never been the type to write letters. You do not have to read it now, he said quickly. I just needed you to have it. Emma looked up. Ryan. He shook his head. No speeches tonight. No pressure. No expectations. For a moment he seemed to search for the right words. I spent a year thinking I miss being married. Then I realized that is not what I miss. Emma remained silent. I miss you. The honesty hung between them. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Just painful. Ryan smiled sadly. The problem is that I finally understand your value after losing the right to ask for another chance. Across the ballroom, Alexander watched from a respectful distance. He could not hear the conversation, but he could read enough from their expressions to understand its importance. For the first time in years, Emma stood between two futures. One represented a past filled with lessons, regrets, and memories. The other represented something new, uncertain, and quietly hopeful. And as the city lights shimmered beyond the ballroom windows, she realized the choice was approaching faster than she expected. Emma did not read Ryan's letter that night. She carried it home, placed it on her kitchen counter, and stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before walking away. The envelope seemed heavier than paper should feel. Not because she feared what it contained, but because she already knew. Regret. Apologies. Memories. Things that might have mattered a year earlier. Things that arrived too late. Yet she could not bring herself to throw it away. Over the next several days, life at Night Global became busier than ever. A major acquisition project demanded long hours and constant coordination between departments. Normally Emma welcomed the distraction. This time her thoughts wandered. Every time she opened her apartment door, the envelope waited for her. Every time she saw Alexander, she found herself comparing two versions of love she never expected to examine side by side. One evening, after another long day at the office, Emma finally sat down at her dining table and opened the letter. Ryan's handwriting filled several pages. She read slowly. He wrote about mistakes he never acknowledged. Moments he should have noticed. Conversations he should have taken seriously. There were no excuses. No attempts to rewrite history. Only honesty. One sentence stopped her completely. I kept waiting for you to stop loving me. I never realized you stopped waiting for me to love you the same way. Emma lowered the letter and closed her eyes. For a moment tears threatened to appear. Not because she wanted him back. Because the sentence was true. Ryan had finally understood what she spent years trying to explain. The realization brought closure she never expected to receive. The following week brought another surprise. Alexander invited Emma to join a small executive strategy meeting. The gathering included senior leadership and key advisors. Emma initially assumed she would simply take notes. Instead, Alexander repeatedly asked for her perspective during important discussions. By the end of the meeting, several executives were referencing her recommendations. As everyone prepared to leave, one board member smiled and said, "You have become one of the most trusted voices in this company." Emma felt genuinely proud. Not because of the compliment itself, but because she had earned it through hard work and perseverance. Later that evening, Alexander found her standing alone near the office windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city glowed beneath thousands of lights. "You handled yourself well today," he said. Emma smiled. "Coming from you, that sounds suspiciously like praise." "It is praise." She laughed softly. The comfortable silence that followed felt natural. Familiar. Then Alexander surprised her. "Can I ask you something personal?" Emma turned toward him. "You can ask." He hesitated longer than usual. "Are you happy?" The question sounded simple. Yet she immediately knew what he was really asking. Not about work. Not about success. About her life. Her future. Herself. Emma considered the answer carefully. "I think I am finally learning how to be." Alexander nodded slowly. "Good." Another silence settled between them. This one felt different. More significant. For months they had built trust through conversations, projects, and shared experiences. Neither had crossed the line separating friendship from something more. Yet, standing there beneath the city lights, both recognized that line no longer felt as clear as it once did. Finally, Alexander spoke. "Emma, there is something I need to tell you." Her heartbeat quickened. His expression remained calm, but she could see genuine vulnerability beneath it. "Take your time," she said softly. Alexander looked directly into her eyes. "I admire you more than I probably should." Emma felt her breath catch. He continued before she could respond. "Not because of your work. Not because of what you have accomplished. Because of who you are." The city seemed strangely quiet beyond the glass. For the first time since her divorce, Emma found herself standing at the beginning of something new. And for the first time, she was no longer afraid of what came next. For several seconds neither Emma nor Alexander spoke. The lights of Chicago stretched endlessly beyond the office windows while the city continued moving far below them. Emma could still hear his words echoing in her mind. "Not because of your work. Not because of what you have accomplished. Because of who you are." For years she had longed to be seen that way. Not for what she could provide. Not for how much she could sacrifice. Simply for who she was. Alexander never stepped closer. Never pressured her for an answer. That alone told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he was. Finally, Emma smiled softly. "That may be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." Relief appeared in Alexander's eyes. Not victory. Relief. As though honesty itself had been the difficult part. "I am glad I said it then," he replied. Over the next few weeks, nothing changed and everything changed at the same time. They continued working together. Attending meetings. Leading projects. Yet the understanding between them had become impossible to ignore. There was comfort where uncertainty once existed. Trust where hesitation once remained. Most importantly, there was no rush. Both had built enough success in life to know that the strongest things rarely needed to be forced. One Saturday afternoon, Emma received a text message from Ryan asking if they could meet one final time. She hesitated before agreeing. They chose a quiet coffee shop near the lakefront where they had once spent countless weekends together. When Ryan arrived, he seemed calmer than she expected. He smiled when he saw her. "You look happy," he said. Emma thought about the statement for a moment. "I am." Ryan nodded slowly. "I know." There was no bitterness in his voice. Only acceptance. They spoke for nearly an hour. About life. About lessons. About the strange ways people grow. Finally, Ryan leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. "You know what is funny?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "What?" "For months I kept thinking I wanted another chance." He looked out the window toward the water. "But the truth is, I wanted to become the person who deserved the first chance." Emma felt unexpected emotion rise in her chest. Not romantic feelings. Respect. Growth had changed him too. Ryan smiled sadly. "I spent years believing love would always wait for me." He looked back at her. "Now I understand that love needs to be protected while you still have it." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. A simple gesture. A goodbye. A thank you. A release. When they left the coffee shop, either looked back. Some endings arrived with anger. Others arrived with peace. This one arrived with understanding. Several months later, Night Global hosted its annual leadership gala. The ballroom shimmered with elegant lights, music, and conversation. Employees celebrated another successful year while executives discussed future plans. Emma stood near one of the large windows overlooking the city skyline. She wore a deep blue evening dress and carried herself with a confidence she never imagined possible 2 years earlier. Alexander joined her holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I have been looking everywhere." "For you," he said. Emma smiled. "I needed a moment to appreciate the view." Alexander handed her a glass. Personally, I think the view is standing right here. Emma laughed and shook her head. Some things never changed. They stood together watching the city lights sparkle beneath the night sky. No secrets. No regrets. No unfinished conversations. Just two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment in their lives. Across town, Ryan sat on the balcony of his apartment reading a new book and planning a future that no longer depended on the past. For the first time in years, all three of them had finally moved forward. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Sometimes losing someone is not the punishment.